Every cargo ship and 80,000-pound semi keeping our modern world alive is powered by the exact same iron beast, a machine built on pure, raw pressure. But the man who invented it didn't want an empire. He wanted to break monopolies. Instead, his first prototype detonated, shooting a valve past his head like a bullet. Designed for peace, his engine was quickly drafted to power silent, killer U-boats. Yet, as war machines swallowed his creation, he faced total financial ruin. In 1913, he vanished into the freezing North Sea, sparking a massive conspiracy. This is the brutal true story of how a cast-iron pipe bomb became the only machine keeping global trade breathing. This is Rudolf Diesel. In the 1870s, Munich birthed a cold revolution. Carl von Linde built the first reliable refrigerator, using expanding gases to drop temperatures. Watching this was his student, Rudolf Diesel. Brilliant, but bothered by the staggering waste around him, every factory ran on steam, massive, hissing, coal-hungry monsters that lost up to 90% of their energy as waste heat. Diesel saw this 1% efficiency as a crime. He obsessed over the Carnot cycle, a mathematical model for a perfectly efficient engine. If he could bridge the gap between that math and cold hard iron, he knew he'd change the world. Then, the physics clicked. He looked at Linde's refrigerator and flipped the script. If expanding gas creates cold, crushing air into a tight space breeds fierce heat. He'd seen fire pistons, ancient bamboo tubes igniting tinder with a single sharp stroke of compressed air. This became his vision. The squeeze. No spark plugs, no open flames, just pure, raw pressure. Standard gas engines ran on gasoline, leaning on its octane rating to resist burning until a spark sets it off. Diesel wanted to burn thick petroleum byproducts or raw coal dust, fuels eager to ignite under raw punishing heat. He originally wanted to burn pulverized coal dust, but it acted like heavy grit sandpaper, scoring the cylinder walls into useless trash. He had to pivot into thick liquid oils just to keep the rings intact. To ignite them, he had to slam air together so hard it spiked over 930 degrees Fahrenheit in a split second. For the 1890s, that pressure was terrifying. We're talking roughly 600 PSI. Steam engines back then barely pushed 75 to 150 PSI. And to actually get heavy oil into a cylinder already pushing back with 600 PSI, Diesel had to rig up a massive, belt-driven air compressor just to blast the fuel through the nozzle. To contain 600 PSI, thin walls wouldn't cut it. You had to cast the engine like a bomb shelter, thick, dense iron, clamped by massive bolts. Diesel's backers included the deep pockets at Krupp and the iron-willed machinists at Maschinen Fabrik Augsburg, the heavy metal shop that would eventually become the legendary MAN. Diesel's backers at Krupp were sweating. They told him his original higher-pressure designs were physically impossible. He dialed it back to keep the metal from ripping apart. Even then, the engine was a beast. It was a cast-iron pipe bomb with a piston, and Diesel had to stand shoulder to shoulder with it to prove his math. In 1893, the first major test pushed 19th century metallurgy past the breaking point. For that first run, Diesel used raw, volatile gasoline to try and force a kick. But instead of a controlled burn, the hot air caused the fuel to pre-detonate with the sheer force of an artillery shell. As pressure spiked, the indicator gauge stripped its threads and blew out like shrapnel, inches from his skull. Then the machine detonated. But the engine didn't blow to pieces, just the indicator valve shot past his head like a bullet. It was a close call, but nothing compared to an earlier ammonia engine explosion that had put him in the hospital for months, leaving his nerves shredded and his eyesight permanently damaged. The blast left him with agonizing lifelong headaches. The rational heat motor looked dead on arrival. His health was ruined, and investors were eyeing the door. While Diesel battled the math and his own failing health, his lead draftsman, Emanuel Lauster, stayed in the shadows and kept grinding. Pour after pour, the cast-iron cylinder heads cracked or hissed out pressure under the immense strain. Finally, after grueling trial and error, Lauster cast a gray iron head thick enough to hold the squeeze. If Lauster hadn't dialed in the metallurgy while Diesel was bleeding in a hospital bed, the whole concept would have been sold for scrap. Thanks to Lauster, the next prototype held together. No shrapnel, just a heavy, rhythmic thud, packing a raw torque no steam engine could touch. By 1897, the iron finally held. That towering single-cylinder engine cranked out nearly 18 horsepower at a slow, heavy 154 RPM, hitting a record-shattering 26% thermal efficiency. It worked, but it was still a towering multi-ton beast. Diesel had a running engine, but no real business. To scale up, he couldn't stay in Germany. He needed heavy industry, massive capital, and a market big enough to turn his motor into a global empire. He needed America. This leap to the global stage ran on Gilded Age cash. In 1897, Budweiser beer baron Adolphus Busch dropped 1 million marks, about $250,000 American dollars back then, pushing $9 million today for the North American rights to the Rational motor. Busch didn't care about building cars. He wanted to keep his beer cold. He needed massive torque to drive the heavy refrigeration compressors in his breweries. The hustle was that Diesel sold Busch a raw prototype, not a finished machine. That first commercial unit in September 1898 was a towering 60-horsepower, two-cylinder A-frame built right here by Busch's own newly minted company. And despite the raw, unprecedented pressure trying to blow it apart, that iron giant actually held together, pounding away in his brewery for over a decade before he finally swapped it for a bigger beast. Diesel was getting rich, but his reputation was cracking under the weight of engines that just weren't ready for the real world. Around then, the Green Saint myth took root. You always hear the story. Diesel ran his engine on peanut oil at the 1900 Paris Expo to save the small farmer. It did run on peanut oil, but not for green energy. The French government ordered the change so they could fuel heavy machinery in their African colonies. Diesel only spun the biofuel angle later for good press. The reality? He spent those years trying to burn cheap, choking coal dust to break the coal monopolies. But those abrasive experiments were a dead end, grinding the engine's guts to scrap. The real bottleneck was the air blast injection trap. Engineers couldn't build fuel pumps tough enough to punch through the 500 PSI of cylinder pressure. So, to force fuel into that firing chamber, every diesel required a massive, multi-stage compressor, cranking out a blistering 1000 PSI just to overcome the cylinder's own compression. This parasitic beast siphoned off 15% of the engine's power just to force fuel into the combustion chamber. All that dead weight and hissing plumbing meant these early cast iron monsters weighed upwards of 400 pounds for every single unit of horsepower. It was simply too heavy to ever fit in a truck. Diesel was trapped by his own design. He built a stationary Titan that could power a city, but couldn't move itself. Even with millions rolling in, his dream of mobilizing the world was stalling out. He had to ditch that air compressor and shrink the beast down. He didn't know it yet, but the solution was about to come from a massive breakthrough in fuel delivery. It would ditch the air blast, finally make the block small enough for transport, and turn his invention into the ultimate tool for a world on the brink of war. The fix for the air blast trap hit the shop floor in 1909. Engineer Prosper L'Orange designed the pre-combustion chamber, a tight internal pocket where the initial fuel charge sparked. That first tiny explosion acted like a shotgun, blasting the rest of the raw fuel into the main cylinder under its own pressure. Moving the heavy lifting into this small space killed the need for a massive parasitic air compressor. Almost overnight, diesel engines shed the dead weight of that massive compressor. We're talking about slashing the engine's bulk by more than half, finally dropping those hundreds of pounds of cast iron for every single unit of horsepower produced. They weren't just stationary mountains of cast iron anymore. They were finally light enough to move under their own power. Militaries caught on fast. Germany's Kaiser wanted this engine as the beating heart for a new predator, the U-boat. Older submarines, like the kerosene-burning Curting engines in the early U-boats, had to run on the surface with hinged funnels coughing thick exhaust into the air. But when the new U-19 class hit the water with pure diesel power, it completely changed the game. Stripping off those funnels meant crews didn't have to waste 5 agonizing minutes shutting down and cranking a red-hot smokestack flat just to submerge. It meant faster, life-saving crash dives. And with the range nearly doubling on the same tank of fuel, it turned a clunky metal hull into a silent, deep-water killer that could hunt across entire oceans. Across the channel, the British Admiralty took notice, realizing that the era of heavy, soot-choking coal was rapidly sinking in favor of liquid fuels. Rudolf Diesel watched war machines swallow his invention, and it broke him. He built his engine to help independent mechanics and farmers break away from the steam monopolies. Instead, his Rational motor became a heavy-duty weapon for empires to project power. As his machine was drafted into the looming global conflict, Diesel's own life began to fracture, setting the stage for one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. By 1913, Rudolf Diesel's dream of a rational heat motor had turned into a nightmare. He was a global celebrity, but inside the heavy doors of his Munich mansion, a place he increasingly called his mausoleum, he faced total financial ruin. Disastrous real estate and oil speculations left him buried under a mountain of debt he couldn't possibly pay. He was a man obsessed with efficiency and balance sheets, yet his own life was a deficit he couldn't fix. The pressure peaked in late September. Diesel faced a crushing October 1st deadline, with massive interest payments due just 48 hours after a scheduled trip to England. Without that cash, his family faced public bankruptcy and the loss of everything they owned. On the night of September 29th, he boarded the steamer SS Dresden in Antwerp, bound for London. For years, rumors swirled he was on a Black Ops run to meet Winston Churchill and the British Admiralty to sell exclusive submarine engine blueprints. And if it wasn't British spies, the other bet was on hitmen hired by Big Oil. Rumors suggested he was a massive threat to the booming petroleum monopolies, putting a target squarely on his back. The truth was mundane. He was just heading to a civilian board meeting for the Consolidated Diesel Engine Manufacturers. Before leaving, Diesel handed his wife, Martha, a small black bag with strict orders: don't open it for a week. Inside sat 20,000 marks in cash and bank records proving every single account they owned was completely empty. Rudolf spent his final days meticulously documenting his own ruin. Aboard the ship that night, he retreated to his cabin, locked the door, and laid his nightshirt on the bed. He even set his ticking pocket watch on the nightstand where he could see it, but he never intended to wake up. In his diary, under September 29th, he took a pencil and drew a solitary X. It was a final, calculated mark of efficiency for a man whose life's math no longer worked. Sometime in the pitch black of night, he climbed the railing and dropped into the freezing 50-degree waters of the North Sea. 10 days later, a Dutch crew spotted a bloated body rolling in the rough swells. The sea was too violent and the body too far gone to haul aboard, so they fished out his effects, followed maritime tradition, and dropped the inventor's bloated corpse back into the deep. His son later confirmed the recovered coin purse, pocket knife, and eyeglass case belonged to Rudolf. The inventor was gone, but his machine was just entering its most violent era. The world sat on the brink of a massive war, and the engine that broke its creator was now primed to power the very empires that crushed him. This was the same iron beast that had fought him every step of the way. His rational motor was no longer a dream of social progress. It was the iron heart of a new, mechanized slaughter. The machine didn't care about Rudolf's regrets. It just evolved. In 1931, folks still saw diesels as slow, heavy brutes built for ship bellies. Clessie Cummins changed that. He stuffed a diesel into a race car and hit the Indy 500. He ripped an 85-horsepower, four-cylinder marine engine off a boat, stuffed it into a heavy Duesenberg chassis, and dragged that iron around the brick track at an average of 86 miles an hour. He didn't win, but he ran the full 500 miles without a pit stop on a $1.40 of furnace oil. He proved compression ignition wasn't just for lugging dead weight. It was fast, reliable, and cheap. The diesel hit the open road. Then the tech exploded. Mid-century engineers made these heavy iron blocks scream. Enter the GM 671, a howling two-stroke dubbed the Screaming Jimmy. GM bolted a massive roots blower to it, giving it a legendary whining howl that became the heartbeat of post-war America, shoving the trucks that built the highways. Alfred Bucke was the real game changer. He saw scorching exhaust rocketing out the manifold as wasted energy. Bucke perfected the turbocharger, using those expanding fumes to spool a turbine and cram dense pressurized air into the cylinders. Bucke's early designs were massive, heavy metal marine units that proved the concept. But he laid the groundwork for the modern turbos we know today, spinners that scream past 100,000 RPM and glow cherry red at over 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit just to cram that dense air down the intake. More air burns more fuel. This squeezed massive horsepower from the exact same footprint. A compact block could finally work like a giant. This power faced a brutal test on the Eastern Front in World War II. Fuel physics meant life or death. German panzers ran on volatile gasoline. One shell hit, the gas vapor flashed, cooking the crew in a steel oven. The Soviets took a different route. Their T-34 tanks packed the V2 diesel, an advanced aluminum block V12 the Germans couldn't touch. This wasn't some repurposed tractor motor. It was a massive, naturally aspirated V12 displacing almost 2,400 cubic inches and cranking out a relentless 500 horsepower. Because a gallon of diesel packs roughly 140,000 BTUs of energy, well over 10% more than a gallon of gas, the T-34 possessed massive range and raw reliability, allowing it to push much deeper into enemy territory without waiting for fuel trucks. It's a bitter irony. Rudolf Diesel built his engine for peace, yet his home country ignored it for their tanks, while his creation drove the Red Army to crush Berlin. When the smoke cleared, the engine went back to hauling the global economy. Every cargo ship and freight train running today is the legacy of that 1893 prototype. But a new problem loomed. The exact physics that gave the diesel its grunt, extreme cylinder pressure and searing heat, spit out heavy soot and nitrogen oxides. The thick black exhaust that used to signal progress became smog. Soon, the public was fed up with choking fumes and tar-like stench. To fight the smog, regulators demanded cleanup, forcing engineers to completely rethink how the mighty diesel breathed. The diesel conquered the world through brute force. Now it faced an enemy it couldn't outmuscle: emissions regulations. A machine forged in the filthy soot of 1900 had to survive an era demanding everything be green and silent. It's an existential threat, but history proves Rudolf Diesel's iron block is notoriously hard to kill. To see if this iron giant can survive the next century, we have to look at the extreme chemical engineering keeping it alive today. To survive an era that suddenly cared more about tailpipe soot than raw cylinder power, the iron block had to get smart, starting with the invention of common rail injection. The real trick was pilot injection. We're talking fuel rail pressures punching over 30,000 PSI, where the computer fires a microscopic squirt of fuel milliseconds before the main blast. This primes the combustion chamber, smooths the pressure spike, and kills the harsh knock that defined older trucks. But scrubbing exhaust took more than just injection timing. Between soot-choked EGR valves, forced DPF regens, and the SCR, modern diesels are basically rolling chemical plants. See that blue cap next to the fuel neck? That's your selective catalytic reduction, or SCR. It doses the exhaust steam with DEF, diesel exhaust fluid, which is just a fancy name for a 32.5% urea and water mix. When that mist hits the scorching exhaust, the chemical reaction breaks choking nitrogen oxides down into harmless nitrogen and water vapor. It's an expensive headache to maintain, especially when the temp drops below 12 degrees Fahrenheit, and the DEF freezes solid in the tank. But it's why today's 80,000-pound semi runs cleaner than a 70s compact car. Massive shipping is moving even faster. Industry giant MAN Energy Solutions, now Everlence as of 2025, is pushing the limits of Rudolph's cycle with the MELGIA engine. It burns green ammonia instead of heavy tar-thick bunker oil. But ammonia hates to burn, so the system still has to shoot in a tiny pilot spray of regular diesel just to light the fire. No carbon in the fuel means zero CO2 out the stack. But that fuel has a nasty bite. Ammonia is called lethal breath for a reason. One major high-pressure hiss clears an engine room in seconds. Even a small whiff burns the lungs and can kill you. To run it safely, the fuel system relies on double-walled pipes. If the high-pressure inner line ruptures, the outer jacket traps the toxic gas before it hits the crew. It's an ironic throwback to the high-stakes explosive pressures Diesel himself wrestled with back in 1890, when an experimental ammonia engine blew apart and nearly took his head off. We might be ditching fossil fuels, but we still rely on the exact same physics of the squeeze he perfected. Peanut oil, coal dust, diesel fuel, or toxic ammonia, the engine's internal logic is still the best way to move thousands of tons. Today, the diesel engine gets painted as a climate villain, yet it's the only machine keeping global trade breathing. It survived world wars, market crashes, and the mysterious death of its creator. Looking at 2026 and beyond, the engine isn't dying. It's just shedding its skin to deliver raw power without the poison. It's a gritty, enduring legacy for a guy who just wanted to build a more rational motor. Diesel built a machine too powerful for its own good. Whether you're looking at a legendary 5.9-liter Cummins or a massive Cat 3406 pulling 80,000 pounds over the Rockies, the bones are exactly the same. Gasoline might win the sprint, but it's that massive, low RPM twisting force laying down over 2,000 pound-feet of torque in heavy haul rigs that actually gets the bleeding work done. So, looking at the iron and soot of his creation today, would Diesel be proud of his engine's legacy or horrified? Give us your take down in the comments.